dudes and dudettes. Welcome back. This is episode 120 of The Anxious Truth. Thanks for coming by. Welcome to the show. Today, we are going to hear an OCD story, obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a story about OCD and its impact on a life and a human being with my new friend, Shelley Hohe. Shelley is amazing. This is one of those people that I'm really happy that I'm getting to know better as time goes on. Shelley has been dealing with OCD for years now. And her story is really worth listening to because this is somebody who did not even understand what it was that she was dealing with for quite a long time. This is a story about miscommunication, misinformation. There's a lot of twists and turns to it. There's some elements of faith and religion in here that I think you guys are going to want to hear. But Shelley has managed to get things together, and she is working hard on her OCD now, and she understands what it is. And she's even taking a real negative in her life, meaning this anxiety disorder that really does suck, and she's turning it into a positive as an advocate for the International OCD Foundation, which is amazing. So Shelley is really something else. She did a great job in this interview. She was generous enough to share the details of her story. So if you are dealing with OCD, real, swear to God, OCD, and we talk about that in the interview, or you have somebody in your life who is, it is well worth taking the next 35 minutes or so and listening to what Shelley has to say. So, Shelley, thank you for coming by and helping with this. Before we get into the interview, the typical, I'm going to ask you guys a favor. Head on over to theanxioustruth.com/recovery guide and check out the book that I have written called The Anxious Truth, a step-by-step guide to understanding and overcoming panic, anxiety, and agoraphobia. I spent a long time writing this book. I was hoping that I was going to create a useful tool in terms of anxiety disorder recovery, and by all accounts, I have. So if you haven't checked it out, go ahead and do that. I would appreciate it. If you have checked it out, you have the book, you're reading it, it's helping you, then I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and maybe take a few minutes and review it on Amazon. So enough with that. Let's get into the interview with Shelley. You guys are going to dig her. She's a great human being, very enlightening, very open in sharing her story. I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you guys afterwards. Okay, guys, so joining me, as I mentioned, is Shelley Hohe, my new friend, who I'm thrilled to be getting to know, by the way. And Shelley, thank you for coming on. Shelley, like I mentioned, is an advocate for the IOCD, the International OCD Federation, IOCDF, right?
The foundation, the
Yes.
International OCD Foundation.
Right, IOCDF. For some reason, I stumbled upon that acronym every single time, and I do not know why. But that is good work. We're going to talk about that. We're going to go through Shelley's story, her entire OCD story. There's a couple of key things that I know Shelley wants to get out. We're going to go over those things, and then we're going to find out how things are going today, because I think Shelley seems to be on a really good path, which we're all going to be happy to hear, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So, Miss Shelley, thank you for coming today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story.
Oh, well, you have a good one, and I'm happy that you want to share it with people. So let's talk for a quick second about OCD, because so many people who listen to the podcast are familiar with all the different anxiety disorders. But do we want to give a quick introduction to really what OCD is and what it isn't? Because some people may be listening and be a little bit unsure.
Yes. Okay. So OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. It's not a trait. You know, a lot of people think like, oh, it's a trait or it's a quirk or it's like something really cute, something like you do, but it's not something you do. It is something that you have. And then like the IOCDF came up with that campaign, OCD is not an adjective. And it certainly is not an adjective. So that's like the best way I could describe it. It's something to where you have intrusive thoughts and then you act on those intrusive thoughts to get relief, which would be your compulsive behaviors or rituals.
Right. So the obsession is the thoughts, which are intrusive and irrational and continuous in many ways. And the compulsion is what you do in response to those thoughts to try and get relief from the discomfort that those thoughts bring.
Exactly. Yeah. And then another thing I would like to share is some people, they will say like they want to organize or they want to be clean, like it's something they want to do. But with people that have OCD, they don't want to do the things that they do. They hate doing their compulsive behaviors and rituals. It's something that they just absolutely do not want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's life-changing,
It's
crippling.
agonizing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So
it's debilitating.
yes. So I think, you're making a really good point, and we can touch on that in a little while if we want, that misconception that the media sort of peddles, and we use the word and the initials OCD as almost a badge of honor. Like if somebody is excessively orderly or likes to be clean or neat or organized, oh, I'm so OCD, which is so not okay to do that. It's so not accurate. Yeah. Because trust us, like nobody that suffers from OCD would ever be happy to tell you that they are dealing with OCD ever. So we do have to do something about that for sure. And I appreciate like the voice that you're that you're using your voice to talk about that issue. And you've joined a bunch of other really great people who are trying to like get that message across, that it's not okay to talk about OCD this way. It's not okay to do that. So I appreciate you doing that. Yeah.
At the same time, I do want to share that I really feel we do need to be gentle. I mean, there's some people that are just continuing to do it, but there are some people that just don't know. Mm-hmm. And so it's like those people, I feel like we really need to be gentle and graceful how we share what OCD is. Because, for instance, like my parents or my friends that we grew up in the 70s and 80s, they don't know what OCD is. So they all use OCD in that same term. So I have to be really careful with how I share. Like, we can't expect people to know unless we share the truth. So we can't blame people for not knowing when they did not know, because it wasn't taught to us in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's true. Even early 2000s.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true. So, I mean, educating before correcting probably is the right way to do that. You got to teach somebody first. And then once they know, now there's no excuse. Yeah. So I get that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's kind of go into your story a little bit. And, full disclosure, Shelley kind of sent me her story. So I know it's not like we're like lifelong friends, but so I know what the story is already. Let's talk about the way things were, because this is a good illustration of the difference between the tendencies or the personality traits and actually OCD. Talk about the way you were as a kid. You talk about having, maybe you wanted to have things a certain way. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So as a child, like I said, growing up in the 70s and 80s, no one knew what OCD was or anxiety. Nobody really talked about it. But I do remember having tendencies as I look back. I was fussy about my hair, or I really liked wanting to have my room clean and organized. And I even remember in elementary school always having to like open up my desk and make sure everything was just so. And so whether that was a want or a need, I don't really remember because I was a child, but I do remember, those behaviors visibly. And then I also struggled with many insecurities and fears as a child. So I don't know if that is part of my anxiety that I struggle with now. I was insecure with how I looked, how I talked when I was around others. I was insecure and I was fearful in the relationships with friends or family.
Yeah.
And then I was also insecure, I always needed to be by my mom's side at all times. So I was just a very fearful and insecure child.
Yeah,
so I sort of feel like I struggled both with OCD and anxiety.
And this is at a fairly young age, your pre-teen years.
Oh, yes. Like I could remember, from nursery school, my mom dropping me off, and I would just have just these horrible, just panic crying when my mom would drop me off. I don't know if that's normal for every child, but I just remember it was very hard for me.
Yeah.
And even going into kindergarten, it was really hard. I ended up having to be held back in kindergarten because it was awful.
Yeah.
I could not be without my mom. So,
wow.
But back then, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to ask, do you recall that there was any, obviously your memory is not going to be great because you were a young child, but do you recall, have your parents ever talked about, was there any sort of notice of those behaviors, discussion of it, the school, the teacher, anybody hey, we might want to look at this? Anybody ever do that?
No. They just, I was just known as a very shy, just fearful child. And so, they just thought that I wasn't, holding me back in kindergarten. They just thought that was the best thing for me.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, what's the word? I can't think of the word, that I just wasn't ready for kindergarten.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, you know what? She's like immature, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe they just passed it as, that I wasn't, just mature enough, and I wasn't, ready for kindergarten. So they held me back. And so, what I was just known as the shy, quiet, fearful child who liked things organized and clean. So that pretty much names it right there.
That makes sense.
What I was like as a child.
It was a different time. I grew up in a similar time. We're not too far apart in age. And you're right. I think back in those days, there wasn't a lot of discussion about this sort of stuff. And I think even the schools, at least here in the U.S., probably didn't take nearly as active a role, in that they do now, I think, in terms of pointing out mental health issues and maybe seeing some red flags. So it just was what it was. That was just your personality back then, as far as everybody was concerned, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move a little further ahead. So this is the way you your tendencies were, as a child. And again, you don't seem to have a memory that they were necessarily, you were engaging in compulsions, but you do remember those tendencies. When does it start to become a little bit more powerful? Like you in the story you sent me, you talked about maybe once you get into the point where you're in your early adult life, you're in your early 20s.
Yes. Yeah. So, in my 20s, getting married and then purchasing our first home. As a matter of fact, this was almost 15 years before I was diagnosed with OCD, or almost 20 years before I was diagnosed with OCD. My mom even remembers when we got our first place, we purchased our home, and she was like, yeah, I remember how you were just micromanaged everything. So, so it's interesting how we could look back and recognize things that are now coming up now.
Yeah.
But so I did micromanage things. I always just felt like I needed to have everything clean and organized. And if I didn't, then I wasn't getting relief from the feelings that I was having. But I didn't know what the feelings I was having. I didn't know it was anxiety or OCD. So right. I just continued to clean and organize.
So you just know that there was a general feeling of upset or fear or just discomfort until you satisfied that need. Like, I have to have everything just right. In fact, let's talk about just right OCD, because you mentioned that. Like, people may not have ever heard that. Let's talk about, you said, I believe I struggled with just right OCD. What is that?
Yeah. I don't know too much about it, but I've heard about it, and it's just wanting things just right. Like, I had to have everything in its place. I had to just, do my laundry, at a certain time. Like, I just had to have everything just right all the time. Like, it was like the perfectionism that I struggled with.
Yeah.
And it's like, I didn't want to do it. It was like a chore, but I felt like I had to do it.
Yeah. And that goes back to the thing that you said earlier, that nobody who deals with OCD or even a mild form of OCD wants it. That wasn't a choice. That wasn't your lifestyle to be super orderly. You didn't plan that. You just kind of had no choice in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people around me just thought like that was like what I liked to do. Like, I was known as like sort of the one that always had to have their house perfect and had to have my kids dressed perfect, and and so, but it was more of like a need than a want. And and that's what I want people to understand.
Yeah, there's a difference there. That would not have been your choice necessarily to take it to that extreme. I get that. And, in talking about just right OCD, let me just interject for a second and say that's one particular form of OCD. OCD comes in a lot of different flavors. So some people listening might think that it's just, hand washing, checking, counting. It's not. Like, there are contamination OCDs, there's harm OCD, there are relationship OCDs, there's past event OCD. There's a lot of different variants of it, essentially. So it's not just hand washing or counting or, wanting to have everything in a straight line, in your laundry room. It's not that at all. It comes in a lot of different forms. So it's important for people to understand that.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's move forward. You become a mom and you had twins. Yeah, because being a mom isn't stressful enough. Let's have twins. If you go big or go home. So
exactly, go big or go home.
Yeah. So how did that work out for you? Clearly, that triggered some stuff for you. In retrospect, you can start to see that now. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was in 2000. I gave birth to our boy-girl twins, and after I had our twins, like, definitely I felt something was off. And I remember telling my husband I just did not feel right. I know I was battling with depression, like I said before, with OCD and anxiety back in the 70s and 80s. Postpartum depression was not talked about in 2000, not that I remember.
Not much.
And so I just dealt with the feelings that I was, that I was feeling, and tried to put on a happy face and go on with life. And that's what I did for about 4 more years. And then when my daughter was in kindergarten, she ended up coming home with life. And that is sort of what shifted everything for the worse.
Yeah. And this is a super common thing. Like in a school, kids are mixing. It is not in any way a reflection on you or your house. It's literally like a public health issue more than, it's simply. But so your daughter came home, she had lice. And what happens? This seems to light a fire.
Oh, yeah. So, because I go back to where I always had to have my house clean and organized, it was like, I felt like my house is already clean and organized. So how am I supposed to get rid of this life? How do I find it? Like, how do I control this? So it was like a lack of control, and it just lit a fire underneath me. It just did a shift in my brain to where it's very unexplainable. I don't even know how I could explain it, but it definitely did some damage in my life.
Yeah. You started building a really complicated series of rituals around this, didn't you?
Oh, I sure did. And the reason being is it took about 3 months to finally get rid of the lice. I don't know if she kept on coming home from school with it, or I wasn't getting it all. Because you have to be so detail oriented when it comes to getting rid of the lice. You have to, if you can't wash it, you have to bag it up for like 30, 60 days, or stick it in a freezer, or boil it, or stick it in the oven. It's like, if you can't wash it. And I just was doing like so much laundry. I literally had to pull everything out of the drawers, everything out of the closets, every stuffed animal, every piece of bedding, towel that you could think of. I mean, I felt like I was doing laundry full time for 3 months straight. And I was just like, I need to control this somehow. So that was my first ritual. Was I used to come home from kindergarten, and because they would only go to school for a couple hours, they would come home and take off their clothes. And I'm like, oh, they're only in school for a couple hours, so I'll put their clothes back in the closet, And so that was like the first ritual. They're not going to do that anymore. From now on, they're coming home, they're taking off their clothes, they're going right in the wash. And so, but that didn't relieve anything from me. And so then the next ritual was, I think I want to be a little more safer. And from now on, they're going to come home and they're going to take a shower first thing too, whether they got dirty or not. And so that was the next thing. And then that didn't relieve anything. Then I started thinking about my husband and him working. And I'm like, whoa, he needs to come home and take a shower first thing too. And then me, what if I get contaminated if I go to the grocery store, or if we go to our friend's house? I mean, I don't know what they've done. What happens if they went into a movie theater and got lice and are sitting on their couch, and then I go over to their house and sit on their couch, and then I get lice. And so it was just manifesting to where I just kept on creating new rituals. And I remember one thing that really stuck out to me is I had company over. This was like the first time I had guests over in quite a while, because I was really struggling. And we used to wear shoes into the entryway, and I didn't really like the thought of shoes in the house. So I had one of my best friends behind me. I'm sorry, it was my husband behind me, and my friend was talking to me. And my friend's like, Shelley, you wear your shoes into the entryway, but your cat, you have an indoor cat that just like walks around your house and in the entryway, and then she tracks that throughout the house. So I don't understand like how you deal with that. And my husband's like in the back, behind you, like saying, no, like don't go there.
Yeah. Ixnay on the Atk. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, good idea. I'm like, for now on, I'm like right there. And then I'm like, okay, I'll choose outside. And from now on, it was like, everyone had to kick off their shoes before they came in. And then eventually, that ritual led to not having people over at all, because I couldn't force my guests to take showers before they came in. And I was just so worried that my guests were going to be contaminated with something.
Yeah. And so really this is somebody that already has, so you're already, even before the lice incident, you're engaging in these, now they're turning into compulsions to keep things clean, neat, orderly, to find relief from that discomfort. And then this lice problem happens and destroys that. There's nothing you can do to get your relief. So you're trying. And since you didn't get an instantaneous relief, like, okay, the lice are gone, we're all good. It only took me 24 hours, 3 months of recurring, I guess, whatever, recurring contamination would tell you, well, now I have no safe place. I have to up the rituals to get the safety. And that's exactly what you did.
Exactly.
Yeah. That sounds really, really draining and difficult. So, my heart goes out to you for dealing with that. I can imagine that would had to be extremely difficult to deal with, especially because you were also dealing with, the kids and your husband and a family. You weren't doing these things alone. These became family rituals to a certain extent.
Yes, exactly. And like the one thing that really makes me sad is before this all happened, we used to love having people over. We used to do family game nights with our friends. I loved to entertain and cook dinner and break out my china and, nice silverware. And I loved entertaining and having our friends over from church. And it just became so hard because every time, this was after the lice and, after my rituals were starting to manifest, they would come over and leave. And then I would be up till 3 a.m. cleaning. And they would leave at 9 or 10. And I would be up till 3 a.m. just scouring my whole house to make sure there wasn't lice or some
contaminant.
Crazy, yes.
And so
it made me feel bad because I didn't want my friends to think wasn't them. It was me. But I always want my family and friends to know that it's not them, it is me.
Mm-hmm. So you're in a desperate search for some sort of ironclad 100% certainty that there is no contamination, nothing's going to go wrong. You're looking for certainty of safety and comfort, and that's just impossible. We're never going to get that anywhere in life. So, but being driven for that is really difficult. Let's talk for a second about the idea of the shame, the embarrassment, the hiding it. Because you mentioned that. I'm sure that this is difficult to talk about. So the idea that you were I'm guessing you were trying to hide the compulsive behaviors from everybody outside your house. Like you said, you didn't want your friends to think it was them, so that you don't want them to see you doing this cleaning.
Yes, exactly. So, and this is getting close to around 2009, 2010. My friends where I lived were starting to really get a grasp because I would stop inviting them over. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely started isolating more because I was losing contact with my close friends where I lived. And I feel horrible about that. And I tried to hide it. I tried to hide it in, the way we dressed, going to church. And like I shared before, I struggled with always having to match our family, our clothes always had to match. For some reason, I felt if we look good and we all dress alike, for some reason I had in my mind that we would look like this little perfect happy family with nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And I know some people probably thought there's, perfect little Shelley dressing her family, but it wasn't I wanted to do that. It was I felt I had to do it. It was sort of a cover up and a mask.
Yeah.
And then as far as, the shame and guilt I struggled with, that I sort of feel comes from being a Christian and my faith. I feel it played a role in detouring me from seeking help. I was told that.
Tell us about that.
Well, being a Christian, I was told many times that what I needed to do was pray and trust in God, because in the Bible it says, do not fear. And I would hear that a lot, it was a commandment, do not fear, it's a sin. So I was thinking fearing is a sin. And so. And
you were doing nothing but fearing, fear is a constant companion.
Exactly. So I felt wow, I'm just this horrible Christian who is afraid all the time, and I'm not trusting, and I'm praying, but it's not going away. And I was also told, I was questioned whether or not I was even a Christian due to my lack of faith. And then And I did everything from going to church, reading my Bible, praying in hopes that, my debilitating thoughts and fears would just go away. And unfortunately, nothing was going away. And it just ended up making me feel worse. And so at this point, it was close to around 2015, probably 2015 to 2017, where I just was losing all hope. I just felt like, if I'm letting God down and I'm letting my family down, it's like, what am I supposed to do? And I felt like I was stuck in my own prison. And I was tired of just having my OCD affect everyone around me, including my relationship with God.
Yeah.
And that is when I started struggling with suicidal thoughts. And thankfully, because of my faith, I never acted on them because I was afraid there too. Well, what happens if I do something and then that's wrong?
Right.
So in a way, my fear of what would happen afterwards protected me from that.
So do you find that, without focusing too much on the faith part of it, I mean, so clearly you're a person of faith and that played a huge role in your life. The OCD was literally like putting a wedge between you and that faith, it seemed. So you were losing one of the big support systems, I think, in your life at the same time.
Exactly. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds incredibly difficult. Let's talk about, so you get to the sort of the end of your rope here. How do you turn the corner? And let's touch for a second here. Part of that, the whole issue surrounding the church and the faith was the belief that you should not be going for help. If you went to go get help, that was a betrayal of the faith, of the church, of betrayal to God. How does that change? Because you did get help. Okay. You're ultimately getting help now.
And I feel bad because I should know this better. But I just didn't. Maybe I struggle with some scrupulosity. I don't know. But I'll share here. And that's where it was about 3 years ago. We were coming home from vacation from California, and we sought to visit our family friends that we used to go to church with in another town that we lived in. And my friend's mom, who I was close to, she pretty much sat down and she said, why have you not gotten any help, Shelley? And I'm like, I didn't know I was supposed to. I didn't think I was allowed to. I thought I was supposed to just have faith and pray about it, And she's like, well, if I had a broken leg and you could see that I needed help, would you just tell me to trust in God and pray about it? And I said, absolutely not. I said, I would tell you to go to the doctor and I'll pray for you. And she's like, well, then Shelley, then why not you? And I'm like, it was just like that little conversation just ended up turning everything for me.
Amazing. Amazing.
I'm just so grateful that she shared that with me. And so it was from that conversation, I decided to look into help.
That's amazing. You never know when your life is going to really change. And all it took was that one little act of kindness from an old friend to point out, a logical error. And maybe,
exactly.
This is a person that you shared the faith with. So, getting permission from somebody that maybe you trusted was giving you good information made all the difference, didn't it?
It did. And then I also, right before I ended up looking into treatment, I just sort of wanted reassurance because, that's what OCD wants. So I ended up talking to my pastor, and I said, because I'm so worried that what I was doing was sinning, because I've had people say, oh, well, God says, do not fear, so it's do not fear. So I would always feel like, oh, I'm going against what he wants because he doesn't want me to fear. And I love how he shares that when God is telling us not to fear, it's like a parent, a loving parent telling their child not to fear. It's like, if I see my daughter or my son struggling, I'll go to them and I'll say, don't be afraid. I want the best for you. And if you're afraid, then, if you're just going to have anxiety or whatever it may be, they can't live their full life if they're anxious or afraid.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I'm going to like ground them, or I'm going to be angry at them, or they're doing something wrong. I just want them to have joy and peace in their life. And if I know that they're afraid, then that's not going to make me happy as a parent. I want them to be happy. And so that's how God looks at us, as his children.
Yeah.
And so it really made me realize, like, wow, okay. So it's not like he's like pointing his finger at me saying, don't be afraid, Shelley, you're doing something wrong. And it's like, it just really ended up helping me with my relationship with God and
what a great conversation. So, and, I think you're right, because OCD is always going to seek reassurance. But in this case, it's a good thing that you went and got it, because your pastor really, really gave you some solid guidance there, and you needed it. So that worked out really well. And I think what's important there is, I want to touch on two things real quick before we sort of move on in the story. And I want to find out where you are now in terms of your treatment. But I think it's super important to understand that the church, and I have no idea what denomination, you don't have to say that, it doesn't really matter, but it wasn't like the official church structure was telling you, do not go for help, Shelley. It wasn't that at all. Your pastor was not prohibiting you. This was a series of maybe miscommunication or misinterpretation, logic errors, belief errors, maybe more in the family structure than in the faith structure. So I don't want anybody to take it as, Shelley saying her church drove her to OCD. It's not that at all.
No.
Yeah, it wasn't that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, very important.
And actually, I just go to a non-denominational church.
Yeah.
So
and that's fine.
Yeah, it's a church full of grace and love, and I wish I would have opened up sooner about my struggles, but I hid it. So I bet if I would have opened up about it and talked to a pastor earlier on, I probably would have not been where I am today.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about where you are today. So you have these conversations, you have this epiphany, like, oh, I'm allowed to get help, and you start to get help. So what's happened since then? What are you doing?
So after that happened, I ended up reaching out for help. I called my primary care physician. That was the first call I made. And from there, it's like they had to follow like the right path. So it was like from there, she connected me to a psychiatrist. And then from the psychiatrist, they ended up referring me to a therapist. So, and that was around in 2018, I went to my first therapist. She was a cognitive behavioral therapist. And she mostly did talk therapy and imaginary therapy with me.
Yep.
And I'm so grateful. I absolutely love her. And she just really helped me out of my depression. And I ended up seeing her for a year. And she was in Salem. Her name is Michelle Degg. And then after a year, I was still struggling with OCD. And I think it's just because she didn't specialize with exposure response prevention.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, she felt it was best for me to receive more specialized treatment for OCD. And then we ended up finding the intensive program for exposure response prevention at the Portland Anxiety Clinic here in Oregon.
Yeah.
And I ended up doing that program for 5 months, which I did ERP work, and I was able to learn tools that helped me resist the urge from engaging in compulsive behaviors.
Yeah, but it's still hard. It's not a quick fix, but at least you started to learn the tools that would help you start to extinguish those compulsions, because the compulsion drives the obsession. So you got to kill the compulsions to kill the disorder, and it's super hard work. Super hard work.
It is extremely hard work, and like I was just in that program. It was almost like I was learning tools, and that's what I was getting, but I wasn't really doing a lot of exposure. I mean, I probably tackled 5% of the rituals that I still want to overcome.
Yeah.
But I learned tools, and I feel like that was important. And unfortunately, it was a program, so my insurance was only going to cover so much. Like, we kept on trying to get 10 more appointments and 10 more appointments, reauthorizations.
Yeah.
And so eventually my insurance was like, no, time's up. And so I ended up having to get transferred to just like maintenance therapy, which I am in now with Northwest Anxiety Institute, which is also here in Portland. And we're trying to continue to do ERP. It is hard because of COVID. Mm-hmm. Because my main thing is contamination.
Yeah, well, so yeah, good. Congratulations, contamination OCD in the time of a global pandemic. Good job, universe. Like, can you get a break, maybe? So,
Exactly.
yeah, you got a curveball thrown at you. But I have to tell you, once you turn the corner and you started getting help, I love the path that the people in your life, from your primary care physician who send you to a psychiatrist. And here's the secret sauce, the magic right here, a psychiatrist who sent you to a psychologist. Like, such a huge, and there may or may not have been medication involved. That's totally fine. But the fact that that person brought a behavioral scientist into the equation is huge. And the fact that your initial therapist, and I love her to death, said, you know what, let's get you some specialized help for somebody who specializes in treating OCD, another home run. So you have been on really what I think is such a great path, and that you have these resources where you live. You had that program where you live. Yeah, it's great. Like, exactly. I wish everybody could follow that path.
Me too. And I get so teary-eyed when I think about it, because I am so grateful just how seamless my care has been.
Yeah.
As far as my mental health. Like, I just felt like I have just had the most amazing care, and I felt so taken care of in the last few years. And I don't even know how to say thank you enough for everyone that has been involved in my treatment.
You are clearly a person full of grateful sentiment, even though you've been through so much, and I really appreciate that. So you're still working on it. Clearly there's some, monkey wrenches in the works right now because of COVID and, the inability to do some of this work face to face. I'm guessing that's going to iron itself out over time. You'll continue on the course. Let's talk about becoming an advocate for IOCDF and your social media presence. Like, you're becoming such a strong voice. I cannot support you enough. Like, I need you to be amplified as much as possible, because you and so many people like you, Mackenzie, and the other people that I started to follow. You guys are awesome. Like, more people need to know what's going on with you guys, for sure.
Well, you're awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, but let's talk about that. So what are you doing? Like, you're the OCD Cafe is how I found you. So let's talk about that.
Okay. So, I don't know why I struggle with OCD yet. In a way, I'm sort of grateful for my OCD, because I feel like God is showing me a purpose in the midst of my pain. I don't mean to bring up scripture or anything, but
you can bring up anything you want.
In the Bible.
Yeah.
Paul in the Bible, describes his thorn in his side, and it's like God used that thorn in Paul's side to humble himself and to be able to be compassionate and helpful to other people. And so sometimes I feel like we have thorns in our side, or, our struggles or our pain, but God shows us purpose through that. And so 2 years ago, when I started at Portland Anxiety Clinic, actually it was a little bit before that, I decided to start an Instagram account to just sort of as a journal, to share my journey through my therapy and ERP. And at that time, I actually started my account as Conquering Compulsions. But then a little over a year ago, after I got out of my intensive program that I was in at Portland Anxiety Clinic, I just was feeling I was sort of feeling like I was being a fraud by saying Conquering Compulsions, because I wasn't conquering a bunch of my compulsions. I was still struggling even after my intensive program. And then the other part was, I just felt God put it upon my heart to really help other people who are struggling. And I just felt like I wanted to create a name that had to do with OCD so people could find me. Mm-hmm. And then just after researching, I just thought of the OCD Cafe. What makes me think of that is, when I think of a cafe, I think of a warm, welcoming, quaint little place where you gather with friends, in which you have deep conversations that are real and intimate. And that's what I wanted my account to be. So I called it the OCD Cafe. And I wanted a place where I could share resources and spread awareness for OCD. And I also wanted my account to feel welcoming and safe for others to share their stories, ask questions, and have conversations with others in the community.
Well, I think you're kind of well on your way to that, because that shines through very brightly. Like, when you get to know you, when you hear your voice, when you see the way you talk about this. Now that I've got to have several conversations with you, clearly you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So I commend you for this. Let's talk for a second, somebody who needs some help. What do you think? I know you say that there's help available through the IOCDF. I mean, let's drop some URLs here. First of all, how do we find you?
Okay, well, I am on Instagram at the OCD Cafe, and there are different OCD cafes. Like, so you just type out the OCD Cafe all together, and you'll find me. And I've been thinking about maybe starting like a blog, so that might be in the works. And I haven't done anything yet, but I'm thinking about doing that. Ooh. But for now, the best place to find me is definitely on Instagram.
Great.
And as far as help, I just want to share that if you're struggling, or even if like you don't even know like what you're struggling with, like just go get help like ASAP, because I wish I would have gotten help, 20 years ago, like right after I had kids, when I was struggling with depression. But I didn't know. And so I just don't want anyone to feel deterred from getting help, the help they need. And so, and then also, I just want to just make sure that everybody knows that it's not their fault, for having OCD. It's a disorder. It's not something that you do. And so I don't want anyone to ever feel like they're doing something wrong for having OCD, or they're doing something wrong for getting treatment, because we deserve that. And our physical health, we would go to the gym and take care of our bodies to make sure that we're well. And you hear people talking about like, oh, I go to the gym like, 5 days a week, and it's a good thing. Well, then what's wrong with going to therapy and taking care of our mental health?
Exactly.
So, and that's how I look at that. And as far as treatment, if you're looking for treatment, the best place I would say to look is at the International OCD Foundation. There are so many resources there. They have just a list of therapists and psychologists and intensive programs, and they all specialize in OCD. Yeah. So they're very strict with their guidelines to make sure that they are all qualified. And so I definitely recommend the International OCD Foundation.
Yeah. And some of the most knowledgeable people that I have found online, folks like Kimberly Quinlan, such good accounts. They're all members. Like, this is the place where you want to start. Yeah, this is the real deal. So that's iocdf.org. I'll link this all on my website. I'll link over to Shelley's Instagram on my website, and I'll link over to the foundation on the website, which I think this will be episode 120. So it would be theanxioustruth.com/120, I believe. Go there and you'll find all the links. Shelley, like, this has been such a good conversation. And for someone who was nervous about doing it, you killed it. Like, you should do this more. You did really, really well. I'm proud of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This was like my second time speaking, and I guess sort of in public, because other people are going to be listening to me. Oh, yeah. The first time was at the OCD Walk last year, and that's on YouTube, and that's fun to watch because I was so nervous. But before that, when I was in high school, I just have to say I used to cut class if I ever had to do a presentation.
Oh, wow.
In class. So this is definitely out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, but you did really, really, really well. I'm super proud of you. I'm happy that you took the time. Thank you so much. And you know what? We'll do it again at some point. We'll definitely do it again at some point. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Shelley. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Did I tell you? I told you Shelley did a great job. I really enjoyed that time in that interview. Shelley was super nervous to start, but she did an amazing job. I'm really proud of her. And it was well worth hearing the ins and outs of OCD, not understanding what it was, some of the use of the term in the media, misuse, misrepresentation. We covered a lot of different things, and I appreciate that Shelley came by to do that. So I'm going to ask you guys, as always, and by the way, just to repeat, if you're looking for Shelley, she is on Instagram at the OCD Cafe. She's a lovely human being. You should connect with her for sure. Follow along what she's doing. She's got some really good information out there, and she's just trying to help, and she's doing a good job of that. Of course, if you are listening to this on iTunes or any place where you can rate or review the podcast, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and leave a rating and or a review if you have a few minutes, because if it is helping you, then you can help other people find it by doing that. And after all, kind of helping as many people as possible is why I spend the time to do this. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. I'm going to leave you guys, as always, with Afterglow by Ben Drake. You can find Ben at facebook.com/Ben Drake Music. See you guys next week. Thanks again. It's in the afterglow.
It's in the lyrics of the songs we know. It's in these feelings that you never show. Yeah, you're doing fine.